The ER on a Saturday night was Dr. Anya Sharma's cathedral of controlled chaos. A symphony of beeping monitors, the squeak of gurney wheels, and the clipped, precise language of life-saving. Science was her scripture, and the scientific method her only creed. In a world of screaming, bleeding unpredictability, logic was her anchor. She believed in pathology reports, blood cultures, and the elegant certainty of a well-executed suture. She did not believe in fate, destiny, or any of the other hopeful delusions people clung to in the dark. Tonight, the darkness had coughed up an anomaly. John Doe in Trauma Bay 3, Nurse Miller had announced, her voice tight with a professional urgency that bordered on multiple deep tissue lacerations, suspected internal bleeding. GCS is dropping. When Anya pushed through the curtain, the scene gave her pause. The man on the gurney was a canvas of brutal artistry. Deep, vicious gashes tore through the tattered remains of his clothes and scored the hard muscle of his chest and arms. They were jagged, messy wounds, not from a knife, but from something far more savage. Claws. The thought was immediate, primal, and utterly unscientific. She dismissed it instantly. Probably a wild dog attack, or maybe he tangled with a fence. But there was something else, something her trained eyes couldn't reconcile. The edges of the deepest wounds were knitting. She could almost see the tissue pulling itself together, the bleeding sluggish and unnaturally slow for injuries of this magnitude. "Vitals are all over the place," a junior resident said, his voice shaky. "We push 2 units of ONEG, but his pressure keeps bottoming out, then spiking. It's like his body is fighting itself," Miller added in a hushed tone. "Fighting to heal faster than it's bleeding out." Anya ignored the fanciful description. "He needs a central line and a chest tube. Get me a trauma pack and prep for a full body scan. I want to know what we're dealing with." She pulled on a pair of sterile gloves, her mind a flurry of differential diagnoses. An unknown coagulant in his system? A rare genetic mutation affecting cell regeneration? Every possibility was a wild, 1-in-a-million shot. As she leaned over him to find a viable vein in his arm, she took in his features. Even unconscious and battered, he was striking. A strong jaw dusted with dark stubble, a spill of black hair matted with blood, and a physique that spoke of raw, disciplined power. He was a predator, even when he was prey. Her hand, prepped within 4 needle, hovered over the taut, corded muscle of his forearm. This man was a puzzle, a biological contradiction. And Dr. Anya Sharma lived to solve puzzles. Chapter 2. The Spark of the Impossible. Anya located a thick, prominent vein on his forearm, a small island of unmarred skin amidst the carnage. Her movements were practiced and efficient, the hundreds of 4 lines she'd inserted before guiding her hand. She pressed 2 fingers against his skin to anchor the vein. The world exploded in a silent, blinding flash of white light. It wasn't a static shock. It was a jolt of pure, living energy that shot up her arm, straight to her core, making every nerve ending in her body scream to life. For a heart-stopping second, the cacophony of the ER faded to a dull hum, replaced by an overwhelming sensation of connection. It was as if a dormant circuit within her had been completed, a current flowing from him to her, binding them in a way that defied every law of medicine and physics she held sacred. She gasped, stumbling back a step, her fingers tingling as if she'd touched a live wire. At the exact same moment, the monitors above the bed went haywire. The frantic, erratic beeping of a dozen alarms flatlined, not into death, but into a perfect, synchronous rhythm. His blood pressure, which had been dangerously low, surged to a textbook 120/80. His heart rate, once a panicked tachycardic flutter, settled into a steady, powerful 60 beats per minute. "What the hell?" the resident breathed, staring at the monitors in disbelief. "What did you do, Doc?" Anya had no answer. Her mind, her fortress of logic, was reeling. She stared at her hand, then at the patient, searching for a rational explanation. Had she accidentally activated a hidden medical device? An internal defibrillator? Nothing made sense. The impossible had just happened, and she had been the catalyst. Before she could form a coherent thought, his eyes snapped open. They were not the groggy, unfocused eyes of a patient emerging from unconsciousness. They were sharp, intelligent, and utterly feral. And they were the color of molten silver, glowing with an inner light that seemed to suck the very air from the room. Those impossible, predatory eyes locked onto hers, not with confusion, but with a terrifying, instantaneous recognition. Anya felt pinned by his gaze, a specimen under a microscope. The feeling of connection intensified, a silent conversation passing between them that she couldn't understand but felt in the marrow of her bones. He was no longer just a patient. He was something else entirely. Something ancient, powerful, and now, against all logic and reason, inextricably linked to her. The sterile, predictable world of her ER had just been breached by a force she couldn't explain, and it was staring at her from the trauma bay gurney. Chapter 3. The Scent of Fate. For Ronan, consciousness returned not as a slow climb from darkness, but as a violent slam into reality. Pain was a distant, irrelevant hum. The scents of antiseptic and sickness were an irritating background noise. There was only one sensation, one truth that eclipsed all else: the scent. It was the scent he had hunted for his entire life, the one his kind spoke of in revered whispers. The scent of his fated mate. It was sandalwood and night-blooming jasmine and something uniquely, intoxicatingly her, a scent of sharp intelligence and deep, hidden warmth. It cut through the pain, the disorientation, the weakness, and called to the very soul of the beast within him. His eyes snapped open, and he saw her. The doctor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe knot, her brow furrowed with a confusion that only made her more beautiful. Her scent was a halo around her, and his entire being, every cell, every instinct, roared a single, undeniable word: mine. He moved before he could think, his hand shooting out and closing around her wrist. His strength, even diminished, was formidable. Her skin was soft, the frantic pulse beneath his fingers a frantic drumbeat that echoed the savage rhythm of his own heart. The jolt she'd felt was a cataclysm for him, a brand on his soul. You, he growled, the single word a guttural vibration, torn from a throat raw with pain and a need so profound it was an agony. Anya flinched, startled by the vice-like grip and the sheer primal force in his voice. "Sir, you need to remain calm," she said, her professional tone a thin veil over her shock. She tried to pull her wrist away, but it was like trying to break free from granite. The strange connection between them blazed. She could feel his everything. His pain, his shock, and a wave of possessiveness so potent it left her breathless. Beneath the hospital smells, she caught his scent, wild and clean, like a storm in a pine forest. "Let go of my arm," she commanded, her voice gaining an edge of steel. Ronan stared at her, his silver eyes drinking her in. He saw the fear in her gaze, and a part of him, the rational alpha, knew he was terrifying her. But the beast, awakened and spurred on by the scent of its mate, only wanted to pull her closer, to shield her, to brand her with his own scent. He was exposed, wounded, in a sterile human cage, but he had found her. That was the only thing that mattered. He forced his fingers to uncurl, a monumental act of will. Releasing her felt like tearing off a limb. As her hand fell away, the loss was a physical ache. "My apologies, doctor," he managed to say, his voice a low rasp. He had to be careful. He had to play the part of a human victim. But the way he watched her, the raw hunger in his silver gaze, was anything but human. He was a wolf, and he had just found his mate in the one place he was most vulnerable. Chapter 4. A Wolf in the Henhouse. The moment he released her, a cold dose of reality washed over Ronan. He was in a hospital, a house of science and fragile, breakable humans. He was surrounded by machines that tracked his every biological function, functions that were currently betraying his true nature with their impossible healing. And his enemies, the shifters who had ambushed him, were still out there. Anya took a step back, putting a professional distance between them, though the invisible tether of their new bond stretched taut. "It's understandable," she said, her voice regaining its clinical authority. "You've experienced a significant trauma. Do you know your name? Do you know where you are?" "Ronan," he supplied, testing the name on his tongue. It felt strange to give it to her, like handing over a weapon. And I'm guessing I'm in a hospital. He pushed himself up, ignoring the protest of his healing muscles. He needed to assess the situation. The trauma bay was a small, curtained-off space, but his heightened senses reached far beyond it. He could hear the frantic conversation of nurses at their station, the soft weeping of a family in a waiting room down the hall, the drip of a saline bag in the next bay. And then he smelled it. It was faint, carried on the recycled air of the hospital's ventilation system, but it was unmistakable. The coppery, feral scent of another shifter. Not just any shifter. It was the scent of one of the very pack that had ambushed him. A cold, lethal fury settled in his gut. They hadn't just left him for dead. They had followed him. They were circling, testing the hospital's defenses, hunting for the kill. A low growl rumbled in his chest, an involuntary, primal sound of aggression. His silver eyes, which had softened slightly, hardened into chips of ice. He wasn't looking at the monitors or the force stand. He was looking at Anya. He saw her not as a doctor in a lab coat, but as the epicenter of his new reality. She was his mate, and in his world, that made her a target. The hospital wasn't a sanctuary. It was a trap, a henhouse, and the wolves were at the door. Anya saw the shift in him, the sudden, terrifying transition from a disoriented patient to a predator. "What is it?" she asked, her hand instinctively going to the stethoscope around her neck. His gaze snapped to hers, intense and burning with a grim warning. "They're here," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that was not born of trauma or delirium. It was the sound of absolute, lethal certainty. Chapter 5: The Hunter's Gaze. Anya's first instinct was to placate him. "You're disoriented, Ronan. It's a common response to trauma. You're safe here. We have security." Her words, usually a source of comfort to panicked patients, sounded hollow and naive in the face of his chilling certainty. "Your security guards can't stop what's coming," he snarled, swinging his legs over the side of the gurney. The sterile paper sheet tore under the strain of his coiled muscles. Every instinct screamed at him to get up, to get her out, to find a defensible position. "You can't get up," Anya commanded, her doctor's authority clashing with his alpha instinct. "You have severe injuries. You could start bleeding internally again." "I'm healing," he countered, and she couldn't deny the truth in his words. The gash on his arm was already a thin, pink line. It was impossible, a medical miracle that was rapidly turning into a nightmare. This clash of worlds, his of savage instinct, hers of sterile procedure, was a chasm between them. He could see the danger as a physical presence, could smell it on the air, while she was blind to it, protected only by a faith in systems he knew were laughably inadequate. The frustration was a physical thing, a fire in his gut. How could he make her understand? How could he protect a woman who didn't even know she was in danger? His enemies were close. He could feel them probing, their predatory senses searching for him. And now, they would smell her on him. The scent of his mate. They wouldn't just kill him, they would take her. The thought was a white-hot poker to his soul. He stood, his body a symphony of protesting, rapidly healing muscle. He was unsteady, but his resolve was iron. He took a step towards her. "We have to go. Now. Stop. I'll call security," she threatened, taking a step back, her hand fumbling for the call button on the wall. He saw the fear in her eyes, the complete lack of understanding. Words were failing him. Logic was useless. There was only one language his instincts screamed at him to use, a primal, possessive language that would shatter her world of science and bind her to his reality. In 2 quick strides, he closed the distance between them. He ignored her gasp of protest, his hand coming up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in the hair that had come loose from its severe knot. He pulled her to him, his silver eyes blazing down at her. And then his mouth was on hers. It wasn't a kiss. It was a brand. A desperate, soul-stealing act of possession. It was harsh and demanding, a frantic attempt to pour all of his fear, his warning, and his overwhelming, consuming need for her into a single, devastating act. The spark of energy that had arced between them before was a flicker compared to this raging inferno. For Anya, The world didn't just tilt. It was ripped from its axis. The sterile, logical world of the ER was incinerated in the savage, undeniable fire of his claim. Chapter 6. The Claim's Aftermath. The kiss was a cataclysm. It shattered the sterile air of the ER, replacing the scent of antiseptic with something wild, primal, and intoxicatingly masculine. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, Anya's mind went blank. Her entire world, built on a foundation of observable facts and repeatable results, was obliterated by a single, undeniable data point: the feel of his lips on hers, the raw, possessive energy that poured from him into her, short-circuiting every rational thought. He broke the kiss with a ragged groan, a sound of pure, agonized self-recrimination. He didn't release her entirely, his hands framing her face, his forehead resting against hers. His silver eyes, now dark with a maelstrom of emotions, stared into hers. Through the bond, a chaotic torrent of sensation flooded her. It wasn't just his desire, which was a roaring fire, but something more. She saw a flash of an alleyway, slick with rain. She felt the searing pain of claws tearing through flesh, his flesh. She smelled the feral, coppery scent of his enemies. It was a dizzying, terrifying influx of sensory data that had no place in her ordered mind. She shoved him back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "What did you do to me?" she whispered, her hand flying to her lips. They tingled, branded. "I'm sorry," Ronan rasped, and the apology sounded ripped from his soul. "I lost control. I had to make you feel it. The danger." "Feel it," she repeated, her voice rising with a hysterical edge. "You assaulted me." The word felt right, the clinical, legal term for what had happened. But it also felt fundamentally wrong. It had not felt like an assault. It had felt like a recognition. A homecoming. Her body, the traitor, was still thrumming with a heat that had nothing to do with anger, and everything to do with the possessive fire in his eyes. "No," he said, his voice dropping low, his gaze unwavering. "I marked you." Before she could process the archaic, possessive statement, a nurse, Miller, poked her head through the curtain. "Doctor? Security is on their way. We heard a commotion." Ronan's eyes snapped towards the sound, his posture shifting instantly from that of a desperate man to a cornered predator. The scent of his hunter was stronger now. Closer. By kissing her, he had doused her in his own scent. He had painted a target on her back. He had to get her out of the open. "Tell them it was a false alarm," Anya heard herself say, the words leaving her mouth before she'd consciously formed them. Her mind screamed at her to call for help, to have this man sedated and restrained. But the flickering images of his pain, the visceral feeling of the danger he perceived, held her captive. For the first time in her life, Dr. Anya Sharma was acting on something other than logic. She was acting on a terrifying, undeniable instinct. Chapter 7. Code Silver. "The patient had a brief episode of delirium. It's under control," Anya said, her voice a mask of professional calm as she stepped out of the trauma bay to intercept the approaching security guards. She could feel Ronan's intense gaze on her back, a silent weight of disbelief and gratitude. The guards, placated by her authority, retreated. When Anya returned, Ronan was already pulling on a pair of discarded scrubs from a supply bin, his movements fluid and purposeful, despite the network of healing wounds that crisscrossed his torso. "They're on this floor," he stated, not as a guess, but as a fact. "One of them. He's posing as an orderly. I can smell him." Anya's mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Paranoia. Olfactory hallucinations. PTSD. But the phantom sensation of his pain, the echo of his memories from their kiss, refused to be dismissed. "This is insane," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Insane is staying here," he countered. He looked at her, his silver eyes pinning her in place. "In your world, you call a code silver when there's a person with a weapon, a threat that breaks all the rules of your safe space." He took a step closer, his presence commanding the small space. "Doctor, I am your code silver. The threat is in the building, and I'm the only one who can see the weapon." Just then, a man in blue orderly scrubs pushed a janitorial cart past the opening of their curtain. He didn't look at them, but his pace slowed for a fraction of a second. He was tall, with a bland, forgettable face, but Anya saw what Ronan saw. Or rather, what Ronan felt. Through the bond, a wave of pure, cold-killing intent washed over her, so potent it made her stomach clench. The orderly's eyes, for the briefest moment, were not the bored eyes of a night shift worker. They were the flat, calculating eyes of a hunter. The world seemed to slow down. The man moved on, oblivious that he'd been made. Anya's heart hammered against her ribs. It was real. This impossible, terrifying man was telling the truth. My office, she breathed, her mind finally catching up to the new reality. It's on the 3rd floor, at the end of a low-traffic wing. We can get there through the staff corridors. Ronan gave a sharp, approving nod. The balance of power had irrevocably shifted. She was no longer trying to treat a patient. She was trying to survive, and her only ally was the anomaly in Trauma Bay 3. He held the curtain open for her, a silent command. Taking a deep breath, Anya Sharma, a woman of science and reason, stepped out of her world and into his. Chapter 8. The Sanctuary of Science. Anya's office was her fortress. It was a small, windowless room, but it was a space she controlled completely. One wall was floor-to-ceiling medical textbooks, a testament to her faith in established knowledge. Her desk was neat, her diplomas framed, her world ordered. Bringing Ronan here felt like letting a wolf into a sanctuary. The scent of him, pine, storm, and raw power, instantly overwhelmed the familiar smell of paper and antiseptic. She locked the door behind them, the click of the bolt echoing the finality of her choice. She turned to face him, her back against the door, her heart still a frantic drum. He prowled the small space, his senses on high alert, assessing the room not as an office, but as a defensible position. Okay, Anya began, her voice trembling slightly. You need to tell me what is going on. Who are you? Who are those men? Ronan stopped pacing and faced her. The desperation was gone, replaced by the grim calm of a warrior. My name is Ronan. The men hunting me, you could call them business rivals. We had a disagreement, and they chose to settle it the old way. The old way involves claws? The skepticism in her voice was a reflex, a dying defense mechanism of her logical mind. She gestured to his torso, where the deepest wounds were now nothing more than angry red welts. And what about that? No human heals that fast. I ran your blood work when you came in. It's anomalous. Your cell regeneration is off the charts. Your white blood cell count is structured in a way I've never seen. What are you? He took a step closer, and she held her ground. The space between them crackled with tension. I am the reason you're still alive, he said, his voice a low, serious rumble. Can that be enough for you right now? No, she insisted, though her resolve was wavering. I'm a doctor. I need a diagnosis. He saw the conflict in her, the scientist grappling with the impossible. He reached out, not to grab or to claim, but with an open palm, an invitation. Verify your data, doctor. Hesitantly, she reached out and placed her fingers on one of the healing wounds on his chest. The skin was warm, vibrant with an energy that hummed beneath the surface. As her skin touched his, the now familiar jolt arced between them, softer this time, a current of pure awareness. She could feel the accelerated life force in him, a biological engine running at an impossible speed. It defied every medical text on her shelves. It was real. He was real. And her entire belief system was crumbling to dust. Chapter 9. The Hunter's Pulse. Her hand lingered on his chest, her medical curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. She could feel his heart beating, a strong, steady rhythm beneath her palm. She could also feel the tightly leashed power simmering just beneath his skin, the patient stillness of a predator. Then he went rigid. His head snapped towards the door, a low, guttural growl vibrating through his chest and into her fingertips. His silver eyes narrowed, and the calm warrior vanished, replaced by a creature of pure, lethal instinct. Through the bond, Anya felt what he felt, a sudden, sharp spike of imminent danger. The hunter was no longer circling. He was outside. Ronan moved with a silent, fluid grace that was utterly terrifying. He pushed Anya behind him, shielding her with his body, his hand gesturing for absolute silence. He was a wall of muscle and feral intent between her and the door. Anya held her breath, her own heart rate skyrocketing. She could hear nothing but the faint hum of the hospital's HVAC system. But she could feel it. The bond was a live wire, transmitting Ronan's hyper-aware senses directly into her. She felt the subtle shift in air pressure under the door. She felt the vibrations through the floor of slow, deliberate footsteps stopping just outside. She felt Ronan's muscles coil, ready to explode into action. It was the most terrifying experience of her life. The danger was no longer an abstract concept. It was a living presence just inches away. The doorknob began to turn. Slowly, silently. Ronan didn't breathe. He sank into a low crouch, his hands curled into fists, his entire being focused on that single point of entry. Anya pressed herself against the cold metal of a filing cabinet, the silver knife he'd given her a forgotten weight in her pocket. She was utterly helpless, her advanced medical knowledge useless against the primitive violence waiting on the other side of the door. Her life was in the hands of the very man whose existence defied all science. The lock, a standard, flimsy office lock, clicked. The hunter was using a keycard, a hospital employee. The door began to swing inward. Just as Ronan was about to lunge, a tinny voice echoed down the hallway. Code Blue, Pediatric ICU. Code Blue, Pediatric ICU. The footsteps outside the door paused. There was a moment of tense silence, then they moved away, quickening their pace down the hall. The immediate threat had been diverted by a hospital emergency, a life-or-death call that had, by sheer chance, saved their own. Ronan remained frozen for a long moment before slowly, carefully, rising to his full height. He turned to look at Anya, his silver eyes dark and grim. The question hung unspoken between them, but the answer was clear. There was no more room for doubt. There was no more hiding behind logic. Her sanctuary had been breached, and the only safety she had was the monster standing before her. Chapter 10: A Leap of Faith. The close call shattered the last of Anya's resistance. The adrenaline left her shaking, a cold sweat clinging to her skin. They have keycards, she whispered, the implication hanging heavy in the small office. They can get anywhere. They won't stop until they have me, Ronan said, his voice grim. And now, they know you're with me. We can't stay here. The thought of leaving the hospital, her sanctuary, her entire world, was terrifying. But the thought of staying, of waiting for the hunter to return, was infinitely worse. For the first time, she wasn't thinking like a doctor analyzing a problem. She was thinking like a survivor. The morgue, she said, her mind racing, mapping out the hospital's blueprints. The loading bay is in the subbasement. It's the one place with a direct, street-level exit that isn't monitored by main security cameras. It's only used for body transport. Ronan's silver eyes assessed her, a flicker of approval in their depths. She was adapting. How do we get there without being seen? Staff elevators, service tunnels, she replied, her voice gaining strength. I have the clearance. But you? She looked at him, at the scrubs that marked him as a patient, not personnel. You'll be questioned. Anya strode to the locker where she kept a spare set of clothes. She pulled out a pair of dark gray scrubs and a plain, dark blue zip-up hoodie. They'll be big on you, but they're better than what you're wearing. Put these on. You're a new surgical resident shadowing me on a consult. Stay close, keep your head down, and let me do the talking. The escape was a masterclass in controlled tension. Anya led them through the quiet, sterile back corridors of the hospital, her face a mask of professional purpose. She swiped her keycard at secured doors, nodding curtly at the few late-night staff they passed. Ronan followed a half-step behind her, the hood pulled up, his head bowed. But Anya could feel him through the bond, a coiled spring of vigilance. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, his senses sweeping their surroundings, tasting the air, listening to every distant footstep. They descended into the cold, silent world of the subbasement. The air here was different, colder, smelling of bleach and the faint, sweet odor of death. The morgue was empty, a cavern of gleaming stainless steel. Anya used her card one last time on the heavy door to the loading bay. It swung open onto a dark, rain-slicked alley. The cool, Damp night air was a shock after the recycled atmosphere of the hospital. Sirens wailed in the distance. This was it. The point of no return. Ronan stepped out into the rain, turning to look at her. The alley light cast his face in sharp relief, all hard angles and shadows. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The question was in his silver eyes, a silent offering of a dangerous, unknown world. Anya hesitated for only a second, the familiar sterile light of the morgue behind her, the dark, unknown city before her. She looked at the man who had turned her entire world upside down, the man whose existence was impossible, the man who was now the only thing keeping her alive. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the hospital and into the rain, letting the heavy door swing shut behind her. She had made her choice. She had taken her leap of faith. Chapter 11. Into the concrete jungle. The alley was a cold shock to the system. Rain plastered Anya's thin scrubs to her skin, and the familiar, ordered world of the hospital was gone, replaced by the chaotic, unpredictable energy of the city at night. Here, she had no authority, no title, no control. She was just a woman in the dark with a dangerous man who was her only shield. The vulnerability was a physical ache. Ronan, however, came alive. The confines of the hospital had been a cage, dulling his senses. Out here, he was an apex predator in his natural habitat. He stood for a moment, head tilted, his eyes scanning the rooftops and alley entrances. Anya could feel his awareness through the bond, a vast sensory net cast over their surroundings. He tasted the direction of the wind, catalogued the scent of every passing car and distant siren, and felt the faint, predatory hum of his enemies searching the city grid. The sheer volume of his perception was overwhelming, a chaotic symphony she now heard through him. "They'll have people watching the hospital exits, but they won't expect us to come out of the morgue," he murmured, his voice a low growl that cut through the sound of the rain. "But they'll find our trail soon enough. We need to move." He led her through a labyrinth of back alleys, his grip on her hand firm and grounding. He moved with a purpose and certainty that belied the fact they were on foot in a hostile city. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, but his presence was a bulwark against her fear. They emerged onto a deserted side street lined with parked cars. "We can't take a cab," he stated. "They'll be watching for that." He stopped beside a nondescript black sedan, placing his hand on the driver's side door. With a faint click she barely heard, the lock disengaged. Anya stared. "You can't just steal a car." "I'm borrowing it," he corrected, his lips twitching in what might have been a smile. "My associates will ensure its return to the owner with a generous compensation for their trouble." "Get in, doctor." The clash of their moral compasses was a minor tremor compared to the earthquake that had already leveled her life. She got in. The car was small, forcing them into an intimacy that was both suffocating and electric. The scent of him, damp from the rain, mixed with pine and that wild, feral undertone, filled the space. Adrenaline still coursed through her veins, but it was mingling with a different kind of energy now, a thrilling, dangerous awareness of the powerful man beside her. As he drove, his large hands sure on the wheel, she watched the city lights blur past, feeling like she'd been pulled into an entirely different reality, one that operated on a set of savage rules she was only just beginning to learn. Chapter 12. The Alpha's Den. Ronan drove them to a derelict industrial district by the river, a forgotten part of the city where warehouses stood like sleeping giants. He pulled into a loading bay of one such building, the metal door groaning shut behind them, sealing them in darkness. A moment later, lights flickered on, revealing not a dusty, abandoned space, but a highly secure, state-of-the-art garage. He led her through a heavy steel door and into his safe house. The contrast was staggering. The harsh, industrial exterior gave way to a spacious, minimalist loft that was both a fortress and a home. It had exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, and comfortable, modern furniture. One wall was a massive, armored window overlooking the dark, churning river. This was his den, a place of power and absolute safety. And it was here, in the sudden, profound silence, that the last of Anya's adrenaline finally crashed. The reality of her situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had abandoned her job, her life, her entire belief system. She had followed a man who claimed to be a monster into the shadows. Her hands began to shake, her breath hitched, and a wave of pure, unadulterated panic washed over her. "I can't do this," she whispered, backing away from him, her eyes wide with terror. "I'm a doctor. I save people. I don't run through alleys and steal cars. This is insane." Ronan didn't offer empty platitudes or try to reason with her. He simply closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. It wasn't a passionate or possessive embrace. It was a grounding. He was an anchor in her storm. "Breathe, Anya," he murmured against her hair. "Just breathe. I have you." Through the bond, he projected a wave of calm, a sense of unshakable strength that pushed back against her rising hysteria. She sagged against his solid frame, the steady, powerful beat of his heart a counter-rhythm to her own frantic pulse. When her trembling finally subsided, he gently set her down on a leather sofa and knelt before her. "I know," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I know this is impossible for you to accept. But it's real." He took a deep breath. "The men hunting me are part of a rival pack. I am an alpha, a leader. They want my territory, my power. They ambushed me, and they failed. Now they want to finish the job." He met her gaze, his silver eyes holding hers. "And what you felt would happen when you touched me. It's a mate bond. An ancient, biological imperative. It's rare, almost a myth in this age. But it chose us. And now to them, you are my greatest strength and my most unforgivable weakness." Chapter 13. A Lesson in Instinct. Anya, the scientist, reasserted herself in the face of the impossible. His confession wasn't a fairy tale. It was data. "A pack? You mean you're a wolf." "A shifter," he clarified. "The beast is a part of me. It's the source of the healing, the strength, the senses." Her mind, trained to categorize and analyze, went into overdrive. "So the bond is biological? A pheromonal response? A quantum entanglement? How does it transmit sensory information?" Ronan almost smiled. "You're trying to put it in a textbook. You won't find it there." He grew serious, his gaze intense. "That part of you, the doctor who needs to analyze everything, is a liability right now, Anya. In my world, you don't survive by thinking. You survive by feeling. By trusting your instincts. Our bond has amplified yours. You just need to learn to listen to them." He stood and walked to the other side of the room, his back to her. "Close your eyes." She hesitated, then complied. The darkness behind her eyelids was suddenly filled with a hyper-awareness of him. "Don't try to hear me." His voice was a low murmur that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Use the bond. Feel where I am. Feel what I'm going to do." She focused, pushing past the frantic, analytical part of her brain. She let the humming connection between them become the only thing in her universe. She felt his presence, a warm, solid point of energy in the room. She felt the subtle shift in his weight, the coiling of his muscles. "He's going to move to the left." The thought was not a guess, it was a certainty. A split second later, she heard the soft scuff of his boot in that exact direction. "Good," he praised, his voice closer now. She tracked him this way for several minutes, a silent, intimate dance of predator and prey. Her senses, filtered through his, were razor-sharp. Then the energy signature of him changed. The calm focus was replaced by something else, something hotter, more focused. He was no longer just moving. He was stalking. He was coming for her. Her eyes snapped open just as he appeared silently before her. He hadn't made a sound. She had felt his intent, his approach, as a tangible pressure. "You see," he whispered, his proximity a scorching heat. He was so close she could see the flecks of dark gray in his silver eyes. "Your instinct knew I was a threat." He leaned in, his breath ghosting across her ear. "Now feel this." He didn't touch her, but she felt the shift in him as raw, unadulterated desire flooded the bond. Her own body responded instantly, a liquid heat pooling low in her belly. Her breath caught, her heart hammered. He was going to kiss her. She knew it with an instinctual certainty that was more powerful than any diagnosis she'd ever made. Chapter 14. The Scent of Betrayal. The kiss was inevitable, a magnetic pull that neither of them could fight. His mouth claimed hers with a hungry, possessive heat that was both a question and a demand. She met him with equal force, her hands tangling in his hair, a silent surrender to the impossible truth of their connection. This was not a man of science or a patient. He was her mate, and her very soul recognized him. But the moment was shattered when Ronan abruptly tore himself away, a guttural snarl ripping from his chest. He staggered back, his hand flying to his temple, his face a mask of agony and fury. "Ronan, what is it?" Anya cried, reaching for him. "Silence," he commanded, the single word a whip-crack of alpha authority. He stood perfectly still, his eyes closed, his consciousness turned inward. Anya could feel it through the bond. He was reaching out, not to her, but to others, casting a net of thought and will across the city. She felt his confusion, then his dawning horror. "They're gone," he finally rasped, his eyes snapping open. They were no longer silver, but a chilling, bleak slate gray. "My pack. 3 of them. I can't feel them. It's just silence." The depth of his pain was a physical blow to her. This wasn't just the loss of allies. It was the severing of a family. He was an alpha, and his pack was his responsibility, his very identity. To lose them was to have a part of himself carved out. "They couldn't have been found," he growled, pacing the room like a caged wolf. "Their locations were secure. This wasn't a random attack." He stopped, his gaze locking with hers, a terrible understanding dawning on his face. "The rivals who attacked me, they're strong, but they're thugs. They don't have the sophistication to track and eliminate my entire pack silently. They have help." He stared at the armored window, at the dark city beyond. "Magic," he breathed, the word tasting like poison. "They're working with a witch." The new variable changed the entire equation. This wasn't just a pack war fought with claws and teeth. This was something far darker, a battle against forces that didn't play by any rules, shifter or human. As if summoned by the thought, a new sensation pierced their bond. It was cold and slithering, utterly alien. It wasn't directed at Ronan. It was aimed directly at Anya. A voice, thin and sibilant like dry leaves skittering across pavement, echoed not in her ears, but in the deepest recesses of her mind. "The doctor is so far from her sterile little world. He thinks these walls can protect you? A wolf is no match for a whisper in the dark. We are coming for the alpha's heart." The psychic voice vanished, leaving a trail of icy dread. Anya cried out, stumbling back into Ronan's arms. The enemy didn't just know about her. They could touch her. Chapter 15. The Doctor's Gambit. The psychic attack was a violation that went deeper than any physical threat. It had bypassed Ronan's protection, slithering into the sanctuary of her mind. The terror it induced was quickly burned away by a cold, sharp fury. They had threatened her. They had called her a weakness. She was a doctor, a scientist, a woman who had dedicated her life to fighting death. She would not be a damsel. She would not be a prize. "They made a mistake," Anya said, her voice steady, pulling away from Ronan's protective embrace. She looked at him, her eyes blazing with a fierce, analytical light. "They think I'm the weak link. They think because I'm human, I'm helpless." Ronan watched her, stunned by the sudden shift from terror to cold resolve. He saw not a frightened victim, but a formidable partner rising to the surface. "You fight with instinct and brute force," she continued, her mind working at a rapid pace. "I fight with knowledge. Your rivals, they bleed. They feel pain. Their biology may be advanced, but it's still biology. And biology has rules. It has weaknesses." She walked over to a steel cabinet in the corner of the room, a cabinet Ronan used to store trauma supplies. She opened it, her eyes scanning the contents. Suture kits, combat-grade tourniquets, bags of saline, and a variety of shifter remedies, strange herbs and mineral powders she didn't recognize. "You heal fast," she mused, picking up a sterile syringe. "But what if you couldn't? What if your nervous system was interrupted?" An idea, audacious and brilliant, began to form. "I can't create a poison that would kill you quickly enough. But I don't need to kill you. I just need to stop you." She turned to him, her expression alight with fierce intelligence. "I can synthesize a potent neurotoxin. Not something lethal, but a paralytic agent, custom designed to target the unique aspects of your physiology I saw in your blood work. Something that could incapacitate a shifter for minutes, maybe longer. Long enough for you to gain a decisive advantage. She held up the syringe. They think my world of science is weak. Let's show them what a well-placed needle can do. Ronan stared at her, a wave of awe and profound respect washing over him. This was not the frightened doctor he had pulled from the ER. This was a warrior. She was taking the fight to their enemies, not with claws, but with the sharp, deadly edge of her intellect. He had thought the bond made her a liability to be protected. He was wrong. The bond had just forged his greatest weapon. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice thick with an emotion that went beyond desire. It was the sound of an alpha recognizing his queen. Chapter 16. The Chemistry of War. The sterile scent of alcohol swabs and the metallic tang of blood filled the loft, a bizarre fusion of an ER and a war room. Anya had transformed Ronan's large kitchen island into her laboratory. She worked with a focused intensity that he found utterly captivating. This was her element, her battlefield, and he was in awe of her command. To begin, she needed a baseline, a control sample of the impossible biology she was trying to defeat. She held a tourniquet and a vacutainer, her expression all business. "Roll up your sleeve, Alpha," she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I need a fresh blood sample." For Ronan, who had endured countless wounds without flinching, the sight of the needle in her hand was strangely unnerving, not from fear of the pain, but from the sheer intimacy of the act. He offered his arm, his muscles tensing as she deftly tied the tourniquet. Her touch was clinical yet gentle, her fingers probing for the vein with a practiced expertise that sent a shiver down his spine. As she slid the needle into his skin, the bond flared between them, a silent acknowledgement of this profound act of trust. She was drawing his very life essence, not to heal it, but to weaponize it. With the sample secured in a portable centrifuge she'd scavenged from her office locker, Anya began her work. Ronan watched, mesmerized, as she moved with a dancer's grace, mixing reagents, analyzing cellular structures on a digital microscope she'd linked to her tablet, and muttering complex chemical formulas under her breath. She was translating his world of savage instinct into her language of molecular science. "Your healing isn't just accelerated cell division," she explained, her eyes glued to the screen. "It's your nervous system. It acts as a superconductor, bypassing normal bioelectrical limits to trigger instantaneous cellular repair. That's the key." She looked up at him, her eyes blazing with intellectual fire. "I don't need to poison your cells. I need to short-circuit your nerves. A custom-compounded neurotoxin based on a derivative of tetrodotoxin, but modified to bind specifically to your unique nerve receptors." As she worked, the cold, slithering presence of the witch brushed against the edges of their minds again. It was a subtle probe, a whisper of dread looking for a crack in their defenses. Ronan instinctively threw up a wall of raw, primal energy, a chaotic shield of fury. "No," Anya said without looking up from her work. "Don't just rage at it. Structure it. Think of it as a firewall. Logic gates. If-then statements. Deny access. Build a wall of pure, cold reason." Following her guidance, Ronan reshaped his mental shield. Instead of a wild storm, he visualized a fortress of ice, its walls smooth and impenetrable, built on the logic she was projecting through their bond. The witch's probe met the wall and slid off, unable to find purchase. A faint, frustrated hiss echoed in their minds before it retreated. He stared at Anya, a new level of respect dawning. She hadn't just armed him physically, she was teaching him to arm his mind. Hours later, as the first hints of dawn threatened the sky, she was done. Lined up on the counter were 5 syringes, each filled with a perfectly clear, innocuous-looking liquid. Each dose should be enough to induce total muscular paralysis in a shifter of your size for approximately 3 to 5 minutes, she stated, her voice tired but triumphant. Administered via intramuscular injection. It will feel like your body has been shut down completely. You'll be conscious, but unable to move a muscle. It should be unpleasant. She looked from the deadly syringes to Ronan, her expression softening. "I've created a weapon that could be used against you. He stepped forward, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. "No, Anya," he said, his voice a low, reverent rumble. "You've created a shield that will protect us both." Chapter 17. Baiting the Trap. Hiding in the loft was a slow death. Every passing hour gave their enemies more time to consolidate, to plan, to find them. The witches' psychic probes, though successfully repelled, were a constant reminder that their fortress was not impenetrable. They had to force the enemy's hand, to choose the time and place of the final confrontation. "They think I'm weak, that my pack is gone and I'm alone with a human," Ronan said, his voice a low growl as he paced before the armored window. "We use that. We give them what they want." The plan was born from a fusion of his predatory cunning and her strategic intellect. Ronan knew the rival alpha, Kale, a brute who prized dominance above all else. He would want to savor his victory, to gloat over a vanquished Ronan. They would give him that opportunity. "Kale has a base of operations," Ronan explained, pointing to a location on a satellite map Anya had pulled up on her tablet. "A defunct meatpacking plant near the docks. It's isolated, full of tight corridors and open spaces. A perfect killing ground." "So you just walk in and surrender?" Anya asked, her heart clenching at the thought. "Not surrender," he corrected, a dangerous glint in his silver eyes. "I will let one of his patrols capture me. I will appear wounded, broken. He won't be able to resist bringing me to his throne room, so to speak. He'll want to parade his trophy in front of his pack and his pet witch." The risk was enormous, but it was their only chance. While Ronan was the bait, Anya would be the hook. "They'll be focused on you," she reasoned, her mind clicking through the variables. "Their psychic defenses will be directed at keeping you contained. It might create a blind spot I can slip through." The hours before he left were thick with a tense, charged silence. There was nothing left to say, no more plans to make. Anya carefully packed a black medical bag, not with bandages and antiseptics, but with her 5 custom-made weapons. When she was done, Ronan came to her, turning her to face him. He didn't speak. Instead, he leaned down and nuzzled the side of her neck, inhaling her scent deeply. He was marking her, a possessive primal act that was also a desperate, silent promise. "Come back to me." She responded by pressing the medical bag into his hands. "These are for you," she whispered. "This is my part of the fight. Don't use them. Just keep them safe until I get there." It was an act of absolute trust, handing her power over to him for safekeeping. He took the bag, his knuckles brushing hers. Then, with a final searing look that spoke volumes, he turned and walked to the door. Anya's instinct screamed at her to beg him not to go, to lock the door and keep him safe. But the logical part of her brain, the part that was now a warrior, knew this was the only way. The heavy steel door closed behind him, and she was left alone in the silence, the echo of his presence a phantom limb, the weight of their survival now resting squarely on her shoulders. Chapter 18. The Doctor's House Call. The meatpacking plant was a mausoleum of rust and decay, smelling of old blood and river damp. Anya, dressed in dark clothes, moved through the shadows of the perimeter like a ghost. The bond was a taut wire stretched across the city, a lifeline throbbing with Ronan's controlled pain and suppressed rage. He was inside. He was alive. The trap was set. Getting inside was easier than she'd expected. The guards were arrogant, their focus directed inward on their prize, not outward on the perimeter. She found a drainage culvert that led into the plant's subbasement, a claustrophobic, filth-choked tunnel that she navigated with a grim determination that would have been unthinkable to the doctor she was just days ago. She emerged into the heart of the facility, a cold, cavernous space where rusted hooks hung from the ceiling like skeletal fingers. Guided by the pull of the bond, she moved silently through the labyrinthine corridors. The connection to Ronan grew stronger, and through it, she could feel the presence of others. The chaotic, brutish energy of Kale's pack, and the cold, static-like signature of the witch. She found them in the main processing room, a vast, tiled chamber with a raised catwalk. Ronan was chained to a steel column in the center of the room, his head bowed, his body covered in fresh wounds. He was playing his part perfectly. Kale, a massive shifter with cruel, piggy eyes, stood before him, monologuing, savoring his apparent victory. The witch, a gaunt woman with dead eyes named Morwen, stood on the catwalk, a smug smile on her thin lips. "Your pack is dead, your city is mine, and your little human mate will be a fine pet," Kale gloated, landing a vicious punch in Ronan's gut. Ronan grunted, but Anya felt the surge of pure, unadulterated fury he kept locked down. Patience, she projected through the bond, a whisper of calm in his storm. She needed to get closer. The medical bag with the syringes was with Ronan, as they'd planned. He would create the opening. She just needed to be in position to exploit it. She saw a service ladder leading up to the catwalk, not far from where the witch stood. It was her only path. As she began her ascent, Morwen's head snapped in her direction. "A little mouse has crept into the slaughterhouse," the witch's voice hissed in her mind. A wall of psychic force, thick and suffocating, slammed into Anya. It was filled with images of failure, the syringe shattering, Ronan dying, her own body being torn apart. It was a classic fear tactic. The old Anya would have frozen. The new Anya, the alpha's mate, snarled back in her mind. "You smell of decay, witch." "It's a symptom I'm very familiar with." She used her analytical mind as a scalpel, cutting through the illusion, focusing on the biological reality that the witch was just a woman on a catwalk. The distraction was all Ronan needed. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the building, he surged against his chains. The steel groaned, but it was a feint. The real attack was the medical bag. With a powerful, calculated kick, he sent it skittering across the floor, its contents spilling out. Syringes rolled across the grimy tiles. Chaos erupted. Kale, startled, turned to the sound. It was the opening. Anya, ignoring the witch, launched herself from the ladder, landing on the catwalk with a roll. She snatched one of the syringes that had been kicked near the base of the platform, her movements fluid and certain. Kale, seeing her, let out a roar of laughter. The pet comes to the rescue. He lunged for her. He was all brute force, expecting her to cower. He never saw the needle. Anya sidestepped his clumsy charge and, with the precision of a surgeon, plunged the syringe deep into the thick muscle of his thigh. Chapter 19: The Witch and the Ward. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Kale's triumphant roar choked in his throat. His body, a moment before a charging engine of muscle and fury, seized up. He crashed to the floor, not in a heap, but as a rigid statue, his limbs locked in place. His eyes, wide with shock and utter disbelief, were the only things that could move. He was a prisoner in his own body. The sudden silent fall of their alpha sent a shockwave of confusion through Kale's pack. This was the moment Ronan had been waiting for. With a final explosive surge of power, he shattered the weakened chains, the links exploding outwards like shrapnel. He was a blur of vengeance, a silver-eyed storm of claws and fury unleashed upon the disorganized pack. The fight was brutal, primal, and mercifully short. Anya didn't watch. Her attention was fixed on the catwalk, on the witch. Morwen stared down at the paralyzed Kale, her smug expression replaced by a snarl of cold fury. "Insolent human," she hissed, her voice echoing in the chamber. "You think your little parlor tricks can stop me?" She raised her hands, and the air around Anya grew heavy and cold. The rusted hooks on the ceiling began to sway, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, twisting into monstrous shapes. It was a powerful illusion, designed to overwhelm and terrify. But Anya was no longer susceptible. The alpha's mark over her heart pulsed with a faint, warm light, a ward of primal energy that anchored her to reality. The bond with Ronan was a steady, reassuring presence, a shield against the witch's lies. "Your magic is just a manipulation of perception," Anya stated, her voice ringing with a clinician's confidence. "It preys on fear. But I'm not afraid of you. I've faced death every day in the ER. You're just a bully with a bag of cheap tricks." As the witch prepared to unleash another wave of psychic energy, Anya acted. She grabbed one of the bags of saline from the scattered medical supplies, along with a pouch of powdered silver nitrate Ronan, kept for cauterizing shifter wounds, a potent, painful irritant. With a quick, practiced movement, she spiked the bag, shaking the contents into a caustic, milky solution. Morwen laughed. You're going to treat me for dehydration, doctor? No, Anya said, her eyes cold. I'm going to flush your eyes. With a powerful, clean throw, she hurled the bag at the witch. It burst upon impact, showering Morwen's face with the corrosive mixture. The witch screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure agony, clawing at her burning eyes. Her illusions shattered instantly, the shadows retreating, the hooks falling still. Her agonized scream was the last sound she ever made. Ronan, having finished the last of the pack, launched himself onto the catwalk in a single, powerful leap. There was no mercy in him for the one who had mentally tortured his mate. The fight was over. Down below, Kale lay helpless, his eyes burning with impotent rage. Ronan landed silently before him. He didn't raise his claws for a killing blow. Instead, he simply looked down at his defeated rival, his silver eyes radiating an aura of absolute dominance. He had won not just by strength, but by strategy, by trust, by the brilliant, savage mind of his mate. The message was clear. This territory was protected. The victory was absolute. Chapter 20. The Dawn of a New Pack. They left the slaughterhouse behind, the sirens growing louder in the distance, a problem for the human world to solve. They returned to the loft, the Alpha's den, which now felt less like a fortress and more like a home. The silence that greeted them was not empty, but filled with the profound peace of a battle won and a future secured. Anya tended to Ronan's wounds, her touch no longer just clinical, but infused with a deep, loving care. Her hands, which had synthesized a weapon, now worked to heal, stitching his skin with a practiced, gentle rhythm. The bond between them was a calm, steady river, a current of shared exhaustion, shared victory, and an unshakable, soul-deep love. He was her patient, her protector, her partner, her alpha. My pack is gone, Ronan said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. He was looking out the armored window at the city, still shrouded in the last vestiges of night. It was not a statement of defeat, but of fact. A profound sadness emanated from him, the grief of an alpha who had lost his own. Anya finished her last suture and came to stand beside him, her hand finding his. She followed his gaze to the sprawling metropolis below. A pack isn't just about blood, is it? She asked softly. I've seen it in the hospital. Families aren't always the people you're born to. They're the people you fight for. The ones you'd walk through fire for. Ronan turned to look at her, his silver eyes luminous in the dim light. He saw not a fragile human, but a queen, a warrior with a mind as sharp as any claw and a heart as fierce as any wolf's. He saw the center of his new world. A pack is loyalty, he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. It is a bond of souls. And you, Anya, you are my pack. The words settled into her heart, a truth more profound than any scientific theorem. She had spent her life believing in the tangible, the provable, the logical. But here, in the arms of a shifter alpha, she had found a truth that transcended all of it. She hadn't lost her world. She had found it. The quiet, orderly life she had lived before was a sterile room, and he had thrown open the door, letting in the storm. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, the city no longer looked like a concrete jungle to her. It looked like a territory. Their territory. Ronan pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her as they watched the sunrise. The world is different now, he murmured against her hair. Good, she whispered back, leaning into his strength, into the warmth of her alpha, her mate, her home. I was getting tired of the old one. He tilted her chin up, and his mouth met hers. It was not a kiss of desperate claiming or frantic passion. It was a kiss of profound peace, of a shared future, of a new beginning. They were two impossible souls from two different worlds, forged into one in the crucible of violence and fear. He was the savage heart, and she was the brilliant mind. Together, they were something new, something stronger. They were the dawn of a new pack.